Nia wiped spilled champagne from her cheek, her 8-month pregnant belly pressing against her cream canvas uniform, while her husband told the university board he had no idea who she was. The Grand Amphitheater at Belmont Heights University vibrated with the murmurs of 5,000 wealthy patrons. Beyond the thick velvet curtains, the Chicago elite waited in their bespoke tuxedos and hand-beaded evening gowns. The air back here in the VIP holding corridor smelled of fresh-cut white orchids, ozone from the stage lights, and the sharp chemical tang of the pine floor wax Nia had applied 3 hours earlier. She stood near the heavy oak doors of the green room. Her hands gripped the wooden handle of a commercial mop. The cream-colored fabric of her maternity smock stretched tight across her stomach. A dull ache throbbed at the base of her spine. Her black non-slip work boots squeaked against the imported Italian marble. The mahogany double doors swung open. Dr. Marcus Thorne strode into the corridor. His dark navy Tom Ford suit absorbed the harsh backstage lighting. The sharp cut of the wool emphasized the broadness of his shoulders. A platinum tie clip caught the overhead fluorescent glare. He checked his gold Rolex. He did not look at the floor. Dr. Victoria Sterling flanked his right side. She wore a crimson silk dress. The fabric clung to her hips and featured a slit that exposed her thigh with every step. Heavy gold hoops swung from her ears. Stacks of thick Cartier love bracelets armored both her wrists. The gold banged together, a metallic, chaotic clatter. 5 members of the university board trailed behind them, holding crystal champagne flutes and laughing at a joke Marcus had just delivered. Victoria stopped. Her red stiletto heel clicked against the marble. She pointed a manicured finger toward the service closet. "Marcus, darling." Victoria let the syllables drag. "Why is the help loitering in the executive corridor?" Marcus turned. His eyes landed on Nia. The laughter from the board members faded. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Nia did not shrink. She rested her left hand against the curve of her belly. She lifted her chin. She looked directly into the eyes of the man she had married 4 years ago. The man whose early career debts she had secretly paid off through an anonymous donor fund. Marcus's jaw locked. The vein along his temple rose visible beneath his dark skin. "I asked for this wing to be cleared." Marcus stepped away from the board members. His Italian leather loafers snapped against the floor. "I gave explicit instructions to facilities management. No service staff allowed within 50 feet of the green room after 6 o'clock. She must have missed the memo. Victoria stepped forward, her bracelets clanked. Or perhaps she cannot read. Nia remained silent. The baby kicked against her palm, a hard, sudden flutter beneath the cream canvas. "What are you doing here?" Marcus dropped his voice to a harsh whisper, closing the distance between them. "I told you to stay in the basement level." Someone dropped a tray of glasses. Nia kept her voice level. "The glass shattered. The floor needed clearing before your guests arrived." "I do not care about broken glass." Marcus slashed his hand through the air. "Look at you. Look at what you are wearing. You smell like industrial bleach and cheap sweat." He turned back to the board members. He forced a wide, practiced smile. "Gentlemen, please step into the green room. Victoria will pour the vintage Dom Perignon. I need a brief moment to discipline this employee." The board members nodded, their eyes averting from Nia's stained uniform. Victoria lingered by the doorway. She leaned against the oak frame. She crossed her arms. Her red dress blazed against the dark wood. She smirked. Marcus waited until the heavy brass hinges clicked shut. He spun back to Nia. "Do you understand what tonight is?" Marcus paced the corridor. "Tonight, I receive the honorary doctorate. Tonight, the board announces my 10-year contract extension. I built this university's reputation from the ground up." Nia traced her thumb over her belly. She breathed in the scent of his cologne. Creed of Ventus. The bottle cost $400. She recognized it because she had bought him his first bottle. "I am the youngest president in the history of Belmont Heights." Marcus stopped pacing. He stood inches from her face. "I brought in $300 million in endowments this quarter alone. I negotiate with senators. I dine with governors. I possess the kind of power you cannot even fathom with your small, pathetic, hourly wage mentality." 30 feet above them, in the shadows of the audiovisual scaffolding, Julian Hayes sat motionless. His dark hands rested on the glowing digital mixing console. He did not touch the mute button. He slid the gain fader up a fraction of an inch. He pressed the red record key on his backup solid-state drive. The high-definition feed from the green room security camera snapped onto his left monitor. The audio waveform spiked green and yellow as Marcus's voice echoed through Julian's headphones. "You stand there with that vacant look." Marcus pointed a finger at Nia's face. "It sickens me. Victoria spent 6 months organizing this gala. She secured the governor. She curated the donor list. She embodies the excellence of Belmont Heights. She belongs in the spotlight. You embody the dirt we scrape off our shoes before walking into the amphitheater." Nia did not blink. Her silence infuriated him. "Say something." Marcus grabbed the wooden handle of her mop. "You thought a pregnancy would trap me. You thought carrying my child would force me to stay anchored to a woman who wears rubber-soled boots and scrubs toilets. You miscalculated." Victoria pushed off the doorframe. She walked slowly toward them. Her red heels clicked in a steady, hunting rhythm. "It really is tragic, Marcus." Victoria stopped beside him. She reached out and traced the lapel of his dark navy jacket. She thought the baby would be her meal ticket. "She doesn't realize men of your stature require equals, not dependents." Marcus kept his eyes on Nia. "I look at you and I feel nothing but embarrassment." The board whispers. They wonder why the president of Belmont Heights hides his wife. They assume you are unwell. They assume you are mentally unfit. He leaned in closer. "I filed the divorce papers yesterday. Did the courier find you at your little metal locker in the basement?" "She probably couldn't read the legal jargon, darling." Victoria laughed. Her diamond rings caught the overhead fluorescent bulbs. "You know how these hourly workers are. Give her a severance check and a bus pass." Julian's eyes stayed locked on the monitor. He hit the shortcut key to isolate the audio track. He wanted every word crystal clear. He wanted the clink of Victoria's jewelry. He wanted the heavy breathing of Marcus's rage. "Get out." Marcus pointed at the exit signs glowing red at the end of the long hallway. "Use the loading dock. If one camera flashes your face, if one reporter sees you, I will personally see to it that you never find work in this city again." Nia held her ground. Her shoulders stayed pulled back. The cream canvas of her uniform felt heavy with the dirty water splashed against the hem. "I am not leaving until my shift ends." Marcus's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "My supervisor assigned me this corridor." Nia kept her hand flat against her stomach. "The floor is still wet. It is a safety hazard." "I'm the president of this university," Marcus roared. His voice cracked through the corridor. The audio waveform on Julian's monitor flashed into the red zone. I am your supervisor. I own this building. I own the ground you are standing on. Nia stared at him. Her silence was a fortress he could not breach. Victoria sneered. She stepped past Marcus. She lifted her red stiletto. She kicked the yellow industrial mop bucket. The heavy plastic bucket tipped. 2 gallons of gray, soapy water rushed across the floor. The dirty liquid soaked into the cuffs of Nia's canvas pants. Oops, Victoria smiled. Her gold hoops swung. Looks like you have a bigger mess to clean up, janitor. Better get on your knees. Nia looked down at the spreading puddle. She reached down to grab the mop handle. As her fingers brushed the wood, Marcus stepped forward. He placed the leather sole of his shoe directly on the handle, pinning it to the marble. Leave it! Nia tugged the handle. Marcus shifted his weight, pressing it down harder. I said, leave it. Marcus leaned over her. You are done here. You are done in my life. You are a footnote in my history. Nia kept her grip on the wood. She pulled again. Marcus kicked his foot forward. The toe of his Italian loafer caught the mop handle. The sudden, violent shift in momentum yanked the wood from Nia's grip. Her body, thrown off balance by the heavy weight of the baby, lunged forward. Her boots slipped on the soapy water. Her arms flailed. She fell hard. Her palms slapped the wet marble. Her knees cracked against the stone floor. Pain shot up her thighs, sharp and blinding. She curled instinctively sideways, throwing her left arm over her stomach to protect the baby from the impact. Water soaked her clothes. Cold pierced her skin. Nobody moved. She lay on the cold marble for a long moment, both hands pressed flat against her belly, listening for any sign that the baby had survived what she could not stop. Julian squeezed the edge of his mixing console. His knuckles turned light gray. He kept the camera rolling. He zoomed the lens in tight on Nia's face. Marcus looked down at her. He adjusted his cuffs. He smoothed the wrinkles from his jacket. Look at yourself. Marcus shook his head, groveling in dirty water, right where you belong. Victoria laughed. The sound echoed off the high ceiling. She linked her arm through Marcus's elbow. Her gold bracelets clattered against his wrist. Come, darling. Victoria turned him toward the stage doors. The governor is waiting. Let the trash take itself out. They walked away. Their footsteps faded into the roar of the crowd beyond the velvet curtains. The amphitheater speakers blasted a triumphant orchestral march. Nia stayed on the wet floor. The soapy water seeped through her cream canvas pants. She felt a slow, rhythmic thud against her palm. The baby kicked. The cold marble offered no comfort. Footsteps approached the stairwell. The door handle turned. The heavy brass handle of the audiovisual service stairwell clicked open. The metallic sound reached Nia through a thick, disorienting fog. The Italian marble felt like a block of ice against her left cheekbone. The cold seeped through her skin, numbing the immediate sting of the impact. The sharp stench of industrial ammonia burned her nostrils. It mixed with the sudden, thick metallic tang of blood pooling inside her bottom lip. Her vision swam. Fractured, overlapping shapes of fluorescent white light and dark mahogany wood danced across her retinas. A high-pitched dial tone whined in her right ear. It drowned out the muffled orchestral music bleeding through the amphitheater walls. Her hands shook. Her elbows locked. She pushed up. Pain radiated from her bruised kneecaps. It shot straight up her spine, halting at the heavy, swollen mass of her 8-month pregnancy. She pulled her knees inward. Her non-slip boots slid uselessly through the puddle of soapy gray water. She curled her body around the center of her weight, both hands pressed flat against the stretched cream canvas over her stomach. She closed her eyes. She held her breath. She waited in the dark silence of her own mind for the only signal that mattered. The cold soaked through her uniform pants. The dirty mop water clung to her skin, chilling her flesh. Her pulse hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her throat. A sharp jab thumped against her right palm. Then came a rolling, fluid pressure beneath the canvas. Leo shifted inside her. He was awake. He was unharmed. Nia let her head fall forward. A long, jagged breath rattled out of her lungs. Her fingers dug into the wet fabric of her pants. She anchored her hands to her legs to stop the shaking. She rested her chin against her chest. She listened to the rhythmic squeak of heavy rubber soles approaching across the dry edge of the marble hallway. Julian stepped out of the shadows. He wore a faded black Belmont Heights production crew t-shirt and dark tactical cargo pants. A thick, coiled professional audio cable hung draped over his left shoulder. His dark eyes scanned the corridor. He looked at the puddle of soapy gray water. He looked at the overturned yellow plastic bucket. He traced the wet footprints Marcus's Italian loafers had left, tracking straight toward the VIP stage doors. He did not speak. He knelt beside the spilled water. The silver carabiner clipped to his belt clinked against the stone floor. He reached into his deep thigh pocket and pulled out a folded, sterile white microfiber cloth. The kind the audiovisual department used to clean $50,000 broadcast lenses. Nia flinched backward. Julian stopped his hand midair. He kept his posture low. He kept his shoulders relaxed. He fixed his gaze on the dry grout lines between the tiles rather than staring at her face. He extended the cloth again, moving his arm at a slow, deliberate pace. He laid the folded white square gently on the dry tile, leaving it just inches from her boots. Nia stared at the fabric. The edges featured a meticulous reinforced stitch. She dragged her right hand across the wet marble. Her knuckles shone white under the fluorescent glare. She grabbed the cloth. She pressed it against her bleeding lip. The soft fabric absorbed the copper-tasting liquid, turning a bright, sudden crimson against her brown skin. Julian moved closer. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not ask if she needed a hospital. He did not patronize her with pity. He placed his large, calloused hands under her left elbow. Nia braced her boots against the floor. Julian shifted his weight backward. He served as a silent, unmoving anchor as she hauled her heavy body upward. The wet canvas of her uniform clung freezing to her thighs. Her kneecaps throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. They stood together in the empty executive corridor. Through the thick plaster walls, the muffled roar of the amphitheater crowd cascaded like a breaking wave. 5,000 wealthy patrons applauding the man who had just left his pregnant wife lying in dirty water. The vibration from the line array speakers rattled the loose change in her pockets. Julian reached into his other pocket. He pulled out a matte black business card. He stepped past her and slid the card onto the flat plastic bottom of the overturned mop bucket. He reached into his pocket one more time. He produced a small silver solid-state drive. He placed the heavy metal drive directly on top of the black card. He tapped the flash drive twice with his index finger. Nia looked at his face. The overhead halogens caught the sharp angle of his jaw and the quiet, calculating intensity in his dark eyes. He gave a single, rigid nod. He turned his back. The rubber soles of his boots squeaked away down the hall. He disappeared back into the darkened audiovisual stairwell without making a single sound. The heavy brass door clicked shut behind him. Nia stood alone. The orchestral march reached a triumphant, booming crescendo. Marcus's voice echoed over the public address system, magnified and distorted by the sheer volume of his own importance. "We build this legacy together," his voice reverberated off the marble. Nia looked down at her stained uniform. The dirty water had darkened the cream fabric to the color of wet cement. The chill from the floor seeped into her bones. She walked over to the overturned bucket. She picked up the black card. It carried no logo, just a local Chicago area code and 10 digits printed in plain white Helvetica font. She picked up the silver flash drive. The metal casing felt cold and dense against her palm. She slipped both items into the deep front pocket of her maternity smock. She needed to move. She limped toward the heavy oak door of the executive restroom. She pushed the brass plate. The hinges swung open, releasing a cloud of lavender hand soap and the lingering, heavy scent of Victoria's Tom Ford perfume. Nia stepped inside. The door sighed shut, cutting off Marcus's booming voice. She walked to the marble vanity. The harsh LED mirrors illuminated every flaw, every stain, every frayed thread of her canvas uniform. She stared at her own reflection. Her lip was swollen. A dark purple bruise had already begun to form along her cheekbone, where the stone floor had caught her fall. Strands of her thick, dark hair clung to her sweat-dampened forehead. This was the woman Marcus despised. This was the disguise she had chosen. 4 years ago, she had walked into a discount uniform supply store on the south side of Chicago. She had paid cash for 3 pairs of industrial cream canvas pants. She had hidden her platinum Amex card in a lockbox. She had wanted to build a life with a man who looked at her hands and saw hard work, not a billion-dollar inheritance. She turned the gold-plated faucet. Ice-cold water rushed into the porcelain basin. The water swirled over the drain, carrying away the illusion she had spent 4 years maintaining. She plunged her hands into the stream. She cupped the freezing water. She splashed it over her face. The shock of the temperature hit her skin like a physical strike. It washed away the remnants of the adrenaline fog. She gripped the edges of the marble counter. The brass plumbing beneath the sink rattled. Her knuckles strained against the stone. She leaned forward, staring directly into her own dark eyes in the glass. She placed both wet hands flat against the curve of her belly. A single tear broke loose. It tracked hot across her cheek. It stung the open cut on her lip. It dropped onto the frayed collar of her work shirt. She wiped the moisture away with the back of her wrist. She stared at the wet streak on her skin. She mapped the exact shape of the water reflecting the vanity lights. She committed the burning sensation to memory. That was the last one. She would not shed another drop of water for a man whose empire existed solely because she had permitted it. She had spent 4 long years scrubbing these floors. She had worn this scratching polyester uniform every single day. She had hidden her last name, her private security detail, and her family's $8 billion trust fund to convince a man of her humility. She had desperately wanted Marcus to love her character over her inherited wealth. She had starved herself of her own power to feed his fragile ego. She had paid off his early career debts through anonymous shell companies. She had directed the Kensington Foundation Board to approve his grant proposals. She had built his entire world from the shadows, asking for nothing but his fidelity in return. He had failed the test. Marcus had made his choice. Victoria had made her bed. They believed they had discarded a nameless janitor. They believed the marble beneath their feet belonged to the university board. Nia looked at the bathroom walls. Her grandfather had imported this Italian marble. Her grandfather had funded the limestone pillars in the amphitheater. The Kensington Foundation owned the deed to the very dirt Marcus Thorne was currently standing on to accept his hollow accolades. She adjusted her posture. She pulled her shoulders back. She forced her spine into a rigid vertical line. The throbbing in her knees dulled beneath the sudden, sharp focus settling behind her eyes. She lifted her chin. The air in the restroom smelled of spilled perfume and impending ruin. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the flash drive. The witness had seen everything. The witness had recorded everything. She turned away from the mirror. She pushed through the restroom door and stepped back into the corridor. The red neon glow of the exit sign painted her face in harsh crimson light. She did not look at the spilled water. She did not look at the mahogany doors of the green room. Her black work boots struck the floor. A slow, steady rhythm. She pushed the metal crash bar of the service door. The hinges whined. The damp Chicago night air rushed into the corridor, carrying the distant sound of highway traffic. She stepped into the dark. She prepared for war. High above the alley, the celebration continued. The elite remained blind. The heavy brass hinges of the green room doors clicked shut. The deafening roar of the amphitheater crowd vanished behind 2 inches of solid, soundproofed oak. Marcus Thorne exhaled a long, measured breath. He unbuttoned the top button of his dark navy Tom Ford jacket. He rolled his broad shoulders backward. The tension of the last 30 minutes evaporated from his muscles. Victoria Sterling sauntered toward the mahogany wet bar. The crimson silk of her dress pooled around her thighs. Her gold Cartier bracelets clashed against the marble countertop, a chaotic, metallic clatter. "Did you see her face?" Marcus walked to the silver ice bucket resting on a mirrored tray. Condensation dripped down the side of the green glass. He pulled the 2012 vintage Dom Perignon from the crushed ice. Daria laughed. The sound was sharp. It held no warmth. She looked like a drowned rat. Victoria traced the rim of a crystal flute with a sharp, red-painted fingernail, kneeling in her own dirty water, her hands shaking. "I thought she was going to cry right there on the marble." Marcus thumbed the gold foil on the bottle. He popped the cork. A crisp snap echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Let her cry." Marcus poured the pale gold liquid. The bubbles hissed against the crystal. "Tears are the only currency people like her possess. She has nothing else to spend." He handed the flute to Victoria. He poured a second glass for himself. He took a heavy swallow. The chilled liquid burned down his throat. The green room was a sanctuary of wealth. Hand-carved mahogany molding lined the ceiling. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note, keeping the room at a crisp 68 degrees. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the center medallion, casting fractured rainbows across the Persian rug. The space smelled of fresh-cut white lilies. The sharp, masculine spice of Marcus's Creed Aventus cologne cut through the floral notes. Oil portraits of past university presidents hung in heavy gold frames on the dark, wood-paneled walls. Marcus stared at the painted faces. Old men, weak men, men who had begged for endowments. Marcus never begged, he took. 4 years ago, I married her because she was quiet. Marcus paced the length of the Persian rug. His Italian leather loafers sank into the thick, hand-woven wool. I needed a blank slate. A woman who would ask no questions while I built my network. I needed someone small, someone who would stay in the shadows while I shook hands with senators and dined with governors. She was a convenient prop, a humble, working-class wife to make the board think I was grounded. He stopped pacing. He took another long sip of his champagne. But then she started believing she actually belonged in my world. Marcus sneered. She started showing up to faculty dinners in those cheap, off-the-rack dresses. She started talking about her little hourly wage job as if it mattered, as if scrubbing dried vomit off the dormitory floors was equal to managing a $1 billion endowment fund. She never understood the hierarchy. Victoria adjusted her heavy gold hoops. She thought a wedding ring bridged the gap between the help and the executives. She thought a marriage license rewrote her genetic code. Exactly. Marcus pointed his finger at Victoria. And then she got pregnant. Her belly swelled up. She waddled through my house like a wounded animal. I could not stand to look at her. I could not stomach the thought of the Belmont Heights president walking into a gala with a woman who smelled of industrial bleach. He swept his arm toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the illuminated campus quad. "Do you know what it takes to build this kind of power?" Marcus demanded. "I orchestrated the merger with the medical campus. I doubled the tuition revenue in 3 years. I courted the Kensington Foundation board members one by one. I bled them for hundreds of millions in grants. I built a mountain of gold with my bare hands. I am a king in this city. I need a queen who understands the weight of the crown." Nia did not understand. She suffocated me with her small-minded mediocrity. The courier delivers the final papers to her locker at midnight. Victoria set her glass on a leather coaster. By the time her shift ends, she will have nothing. No access to the joint accounts. Marcus smoothed the lapel of his suit. No claim to the house. I froze the marital assets 3 days ago. And the forged vendor invoices? Victoria tapped her red stiletto against the brass footrail of the bar. The ones bearing her forged signature as the primary contracting authority? Already routed through the Cayman Shell Company. Marcus waved his free hand. He dismissed the crime as a mere administrative task. $3.2 million wiped from the university endowment. I authorized the transfers. You fabricated the paper trail. We buried the evidence under a dozen phantom limited liability corporations. The board of directors thinks the money went to the new athletics complex plumbing renovations. They will never look twice. When the auditors arrive next quarter, they will find Nia's name at the bottom of every fraudulent requisition form. Victoria ran her hand over the polished mahogany bar. You framed your own pregnant wife for federal embezzlement. Victoria smiled. A masterstroke. A necessary precaution. Marcus adjusted his platinum tie clip. If she ever tries to fight the divorce settlement, I will hand those documents over to the district attorney. She signs the non-disclosure agreement. She accepts a modest $10,000 severance and she walks away. If she speaks to the press, she goes to federal prison for 20 years. Her child goes into the state foster system. Victoria laughed. The bright sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling. You are ruthless, Marcus. I am a survivor. He poured more pale gold liquid into his glass. I grew up with nothing. I clawed my way into the elite circles of this city. I will not let a woman with dirt under her fingernails drag me back down to the bottom. She is 8 months along. Victoria traced the rim of her glass. The courts usually favor the mother. Marcus stopped moving. His jaw tightened. The thick vein along his dark temple throbbed beneath the skin. He set his crystal flute onto the bar with a sharp crack. "She gets nothing." Marcus lowered his voice. "I filed an emergency custody injunction this morning. I cited severe mental instability. I cited her squalid living conditions. My lawyer drafted a sworn affidavit stating she threatened to harm herself and the baby. She didn't do any of that. She has no money to hire a lawyer to prove otherwise." Marcus stepped closer to Victoria. He placed his hands on her waist. "She makes $14 an hour scrubbing toilets. I control the narrative. I control the courts. The presiding family court judge plays golf with me every Sunday at the country club. I will take the boy the moment they cut the umbilical cord. I will leave her to rot in the Southside slums." Marcus turned his head. He stared at his own reflection in the antique mirror behind the liquor bottles. The harsh track lighting caught the gold bezel of his Rolex. Marcus leaned close. "She is a nameless peasant who got to scrub the floors of my castle, and tomorrow I am erasing her from history." He grabbed his crystal flute again. He drained the remaining champagne. "Words are wind, Marcus." Victoria reached out. She snatched the empty glass from his hand. She slammed it down on the counter. "I spent 6 months curating this gala. I spent 2 years falsifying your expense reports. I risked my own career to build this empire you boast about." She stepped into his space. The scent of her heavy, suffocating Tom Ford perfume overwhelmed the room. "I want my name on the primary deed to the Gold Coast penthouse." Victoria reached up. She grabbed the knot of his platinum tie. She twisted the silk fabric around her knuckles. "I want the equity stake in the offshore trust finalized by Friday, and I want the ring." Marcus looked down at her. He placed his large hands on her hips. He felt the slick crimson silk beneath his palms. "You doubt my commitment? I demand collateral." Victoria tightened her grip on his tie, forcing him to bow his head slightly. "You discarded your wife the moment she became an inconvenience to your public image. I will not be your next disposable stepping stone." Victoria released his tie. She took a step back. Her red stilettos clicked against the hardwood border of the floor. She picked up her sleek black smartphone from the bar. Her thumb swiped the screen. A blue text bubble illuminated her face in the dim room. Her lips curled into a slow, calculating smile. She locked the screen. She dropped the phone into her red velvet clutch. The metal clasp snapped shut. She placed both hands flat against her stomach. Her manicured fingers rested over the smooth crimson silk of her flat belly. "I went to the clinic on Michigan Avenue this morning." Victoria dropped her voice. A theatrical whisper. "I got the blood test results." Marcus froze. The breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted to her hands resting on the red dress. "Victoria, I am 6 weeks late, Marcus." She stroked her stomach. She manufactured a tender, watery smile. "We are having a child, an heir worthy of your legacy, a child born of power, not of poverty." Marcus stared at her hands. His chest swelled. A triumphant, booming laugh erupted from his lungs. The sound bounced off the oil portraits. He closed the distance. He wrapped his arms around her waist. He lifted her red stiletto heels an inch off the Persian rug. "An heir." Marcus spun her around. "A true heir." He set her down. He kissed her forehead. He grabbed his phone from his inside breast pocket. "I need to call Harrison." Marcus swiped his thumbs across the glass screen. "I need the divorce expedited tonight. I need the custody block airtight before midnight." I will not have my new child sharing a bloodline with a janitor's bastard. Marcus turned his back to her. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The limestone pillars of the library glowed under the security floodlights. He pressed the phone to his ear. He waited for his lawyer to answer. "Oh!" Victoria stood by the mahogany bar. She watched his broad shoulders through the reflection in the window glass. She reached for her crystal flute. She lifted the glass to her red lips. She tilted her head back. She swallowed the rest of the vintage champagne in one long, continuous gulp. The alcohol burned her throat. She set the empty glass down behind the ice bucket where he would not see it. "Harrison," Marcus barked into the receiver, "execute the filings, all of them." He listened for 3 seconds. He traced the gold face of his Rolex with his thumb. "I do not care about the mandatory waiting period." Marcus stared at the glowing canvas below. "Bribe the county clerk, threaten the magistrate, do whatever you have to do to sever my legal ties to that woman tonight. Transfer the remaining joint funds to the Cayman account before midnight." The voice on the other end murmured a hesitation. The lawyer urged caution. "Do it," Marcus snapped. "She is nothing. Her family does not exist. She lacks the resources to fight back. She will crawl into a hole and disappear. If she fights the custody order, you bury her in legal fees until she starves in the street." Marcus lowered the phone. He pressed the red end call button. The machine was in motion. He had set the legal trap. It was done. He slicked the phone back into his suit jacket. He turned away from the window. The amphitheater walls vibrated with the muffled sound of the orchestra striking up the final movement. The low bass notes rattled the crystal flutes on the bar. His moment was approaching. The board of directors was waiting to crown him king. He walked back to the antique mirror. He adjusted his silver cufflinks, twisting the metal until the engraved monogram caught the light. He pulled his navy lapels sharp. His trousers fell in crisp, unbroken lines over his Italian loafers. He poured one final measure of the pale gold champagne into his own glass. He looked at the man in the mirror. He saw a titan. He saw an emperor who had excised a rotting limb from his flawless life. He saw a force of nature standing at the pinnacle of Chicago society. He raised the crystal flute. He smiled at his own reflection. He felt untouchable. His delusion crystallized. The betrayal accelerated miles away. The heavy brass door handle turned. 50 floors above the rain-soaked streets of downtown Chicago, the executive conference room at Harrison & Vance smelled of roasted espresso and lemon wood polish. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of a 14-foot slab of polished black granite. The sweeping floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a commanding view of the city he was currently conquering. 3 corporate attorneys in tailored charcoal suits worked in tense, coordinated silence. They slid thick stacks of watermarked parchment across the reflective stone table. Marcus signed his name. The platinum nib of his Mont Blanc fountain pen scratched against the heavy paper, a sharp, fatal sound. He did not bother to read the paragraphs of dense legal text. He did not need to. The joint checking accounts at Chase Bank are frozen. Harrison Vance tapped a manicured finger against his leather folio. Access revoked. The Honda Civic? Marcus lifted a crystal tumbler of Macallan 25 to his lips. Towed from the Belmont Heights staff parking lot 20 minutes ago, the vehicle title remains in your name. We reported it stolen by a disgruntled employee. The police impound lot will hold it indefinitely pending an investigation. Marcus swallowed the scotch. The amber liquid burned a warm, satisfying trail down his throat. The health insurance? Canceled. Harrison adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. Human Resources processed the termination under the morality clause of the University Employee Handbook. Effective immediately. She has no coverage. Marcus set the crystal glass on the granite. The heavy base clicked against the stone. He was stripping a human being down to her bones. He was dismantling her existence keystroke by keystroke. The legal machine moved with ruthless, mechanical efficiency. There was no blood, there was only ink. Draft the emergency custody injunction. Marcus leaned back in his leather ergonomic chair, crossing his ankles. Cite severe mental instability. Cite the termination of her employment. Cite homelessness. I want a judge to sign the order granting me sole physical and legal custody of the infant the moment the umbilical cord is severed. Harrison paused. The lawyer shifted his weight in his seat. She is 8 months pregnant, Marcus. Judges typically favor the mother in the immediate postpartum period unless there is documented, undeniable negligence. Judge Heiress plays golf with me every Sunday at Oak Brook. Marcus let his voice drop to a low, dangerous register. He owes his daughter's admission to my medical school to me. He will sign the paper. Draft it. Harrison nodded. He made a note on his yellow legal pad. It is done. An hour later, Marcus stood in the second-floor hallway of his Gold Coast townhouse. The sharp whine of a cordless power drill echoed up the curved mahogany staircase. A bonded locksmith was replacing the brass deadbolt on the custom oak front door, swapping the heavy tumblers. Her keys were now useless pieces of jagged metal. He walked toward the master bedroom to pack a bespoke leather overnight bag. He stopped. He looked down the dim corridor toward the half-open door of the nursery, staring at the hand-carved mahogany crib waiting in the shadows. He took a single step forward, the heavy silence of the empty house pressing against his chest. His phone buzzed in his breast pocket with a text from Victoria, a red heart emoji glowing on the locked screen. He turned his back on the room and walked away. 2 miles away, the maternity triage unit at Northwestern Memorial Hospital smelled of rubbing alcohol and bleached cotton sheets. Nia sat on the edge of a stiff vinyl examination bed, the white tissue paper crinkled beneath the heavy weight of her body. The dirty mop water had dried into the fabric of her cream canvas uniform hours ago. It left stiff, gray rings around her knees and calves. A purple bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone, stretching from the corner of her eye to the edge of her jaw where the marble floor had struck her face. Her bottom lip throbbed with a steady, dull pulse. A thick, elastic belt wrapped tight around her swollen belly. The plastic fetal monitor pressed flat against her skin. A steady, rhythmic thud echoed from the machine's small speaker. 145 beats per minute. Leo was alive. Leo was strong. Nia rested her left hand over the curve of her stomach. She kept her fingers spread wide, feeling the warmth of her own skin through the abrasive canvas smock. She stared at the blank white wall opposite the bed. She did not cry. Her tears had vanished in the executive bathroom. Only cold calculation remained. The heavy wooden door pushed open. Clara walked into the triage room. "Oh!" Clara was the night shift facilities manager at Belmont Heights. Clara was the woman who had shared lukewarm coffee with Nia in the basement break room for 3 years. Clara had brought ginger ale when Nia's morning sickness was at its worst. Clara had knitted a soft yellow blanket for the baby, spending her unpaid lunch breaks looping yarn with cheap plastic needles. Clara did not carry yarn today. She carried a beige legal folder. She stopped 2 feet from the examination bed. She refused to meet Nia's eyes. She stared at the gray rings of dirty water on Nia's canvas pants. "Clara." Nia kept her voice low. The dry, filtered air of the hospital scratched at her throat. Clara set the beige folder on the metal rolling tray next to the bed. Her hands shook. The silver metal tray rattled against the bed frame. "Human Resources called me." Clara kept her eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "They told me to come down here. They told me to bring this to you." Nia looked at the folder. She did not reach for it. "My keycard stopped working at the staff entrance. My locker code was wiped." Dr. Thorne invoked a gross misconduct clause. Clara rubbed her hands down her dark blue uniform pants, trying to dry her sweating palms. "You are fired, Nia. Your health insurance was terminated at 8 o'clock. The hospital billing department just tried to run your card for this triage visit. The system kicked it back. You have no coverage." Nia traced her thumb across her belly. The baby shifted, a heavy, rolling pressure beneath her palm. "Why are you delivering his paperwork, Clara?" Clara flinched. The question hit her like a physical strike. She looked up. Her brown eyes were rimmed with red, swimming with a volatile mixture of guilt and defensive anger. "Marcus Thorne offered me the director of facilities position." Clara blurted the words out fast, trying to outrun her own shame. "A 6-figure salary, a corner office in the administration building. Full tuition remission for my girls. I have 2 daughters in college. Nia, I am drowning in PLUS loans. I am suffocating under a second mortgage." Nia stared at her friend. The silence in the room grew heavy, punctuated only by the rapid thud of the fetal heart monitor. "He told you to serve me the divorce papers." Nia looked at the beige folder. "He made it a condition of your promotion." "I can't sync with you." Clara backed toward the door. Her rubber-soled shoes squeaked against the floor. "I am sorry he threw you away. I am sorry you got pregnant by a man who despises our kind of people. But you were stupid to think you could trap a man who wears $5,000 suits. You played a dangerous game, and you lost. I cannot let my daughters starve because you flew too close to the sun." Clara reached the door. "Sign the papers, Nia." Clara grabbed the metal handle. Her voice cracked under the weight of her betrayal. "Just sign them and disappear. He will destroy you if you fight him." Clara walked out. The heavy door clicked shut. Nia sat alone. She had spent 3 years listening to Clara talk about her daughters. She had anonymously funded the very scholarship program Clara's oldest daughter was currently using to attend Belmont Heights. Clara did not know she was speaking to the sole benefactor of her child's education. Clara saw only a broken janitor sitting on a vinyl bed. Nia pulled her shoulders back. She lifted her chin. She placed both hands flat against her stomach. The metal tray rattled again. The wooden door swung open with brutal force. Marcus Thorne stepped into the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room. His dark navy Tom Ford suit absorbed the sterile glare. The sharp cut of the Italian wool looked menacing in the small, clinical space. He smelled of Creed Aventus and vintage champagne. He brought the arrogant, suffocating atmosphere of the executive green room with him. Nia instinctively curled her shoulders forward. She pulled her knees together. She slid both hands over her belly, shielding the baby from the man looming at the foot of her bed. Marcus looked at the plastic monitor strapped to her stomach. He looked at the bruised, swollen skin around her eye. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "The locks at the townhouse are changed." Marcus spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who held all the cards. "Your key will not work. Your clothes are in a garbage bag by the service entrance." Nia did not speak. She met his gaze. "Your Honda is sitting in a police impound lot." Marcus walked toward the metal tray. He picked up the beige folder Clara had left. "The joint checking account has a balance of 0. I transferred the funds to a private trust. The credit cards are canceled. Your cell phone plan is deactivated." The memory surfaced without warning. "She is a nameless peasant who got to scrub the floors of my castle, and tomorrow I am erasing her from history." A jagged, bleeding loop playing over the rhythmic thud of the heart monitor. Marcus tossed the folder onto her lap. It landed on her cream canvas uniform with a heavy slap. "You thought you could embarrass me in front of the university board." Marcus leaned over the bed. He placed both hands on the mattress, trapping her between his arms. "You thought you could defy me in my own hallway, and I would just let you walk home to my house and sleep in my bed." Nia stared into his eyes. Her silence was a fortress he could not breach. "Sign the settlement agreement." Marcus tapped the beige folder. "You waive all rights to alimony. You accept a one-time payment of $10,000. In exchange, I will not hand the federal authorities the forged purchasing invoices bearing your signature. I will not send the mother of my child to federal prison for embezzling $3 million from the university endowment." Nia's breath caught in her throat. Her chest tightened. Victoria had processed those invoices. Marcus had framed her. "And the baby?" Nia met his stare. A quiet, terrifying calm settled in her chest. Marcus straightened his spine. He adjusted his platinum tie clip. The fluorescent light caught the expensive metal. "The boy comes with me." Marcus delivered the words with casual indifference. "I filed an emergency injunction tonight. Judge Heiress signed it 20 minutes ago. You have no job. You have no car. You have no home. You have no money to pay the bill for the bed you are sitting on." He stepped closer. He leaned down until his breath brushed her bruised cheek. "You have nothing," Marcus whispered. "You are nothing." He turned his back. His Italian leather loafers clicked against the linoleum. He pushed through the heavy wooden door without looking back. The hinges hissed. The door slammed shut. The silence crashed down around her. 2 minutes later, a hospital billing administrator walked into the room. A short woman with a tight bun and a plastic clipboard. Her eyes flicked nervously to the gray rings of dirty water on Nia's pants. "Ma'am," the administrator cleared her throat, "your insurance was flagged as inactive. We cannot process your stay without a valid credit card on file. If you cannot provide an alternate form of payment, we have to discharge you immediately." Nia reached for the thick elastic belt around her waist. She unclipped the plastic fetal monitor. The rhythmic thud of Leo's heartbeat vanished from the room, replaced by a sharp, continuous dial tone from the machine. "I understand." She swung her legs off the bed. Her black, non-slip boots hit the floor. Her knees throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. She stood up. Her spine formed a rigid, vertical line. She left the beige folder sitting on the white tissue paper. She walked out of the triage room. She walked down the long, sterile corridor of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The cold air conditioning bit through her damp canvas uniform. She reached the main lobby. Massive glass windows overlooked the dark streets of downtown Chicago. The storm had broken. Heavy rain lashed against the glass, distorting the red taillights of the passing taxis into bleeding streaks of color. She sat on a hard wooden bench near the sliding exit doors. She had no home. She had no car. She had no husband. Her best friend had sold her for a desk in an air-conditioned office. The man she had loved for 4 years had just orchestrated her destruction. She reached into the deep right pocket of her stained maternity smock. Her fingers bypassed the empty lint where her house keys used to sit. She pulled out the matte black business card. Her thumb brushed the cold casing of the heavy silver flash drive. She stared at the white Helvetica font printed on the card. 10 digits, a local area code, no name, no logo, just a direct lifeline to the witness sitting in the dark of the amphitheater. She reached into her left pocket. She pulled out her cracked smartphone. The glass screen fractured from her fall onto the marble floor. The cellular network icon showed a red slash. Marcus had cut the service. The hospital public Wi-Fi was free. She connected to the network. She opened a secure, encrypted messaging application. She typed the 10 numbers into the keypad. She pressed send. The bright white screen illuminated her bruised face in the dark lobby. The line connected. The encrypted message marked as delivered. The screen went black. Silence held the room for one heartbeat. Then, agony struck. A violent, tearing pressure ripped through the center of Nia's abdomen. The delayed toll of the marble floor finally snapped into focus. Her spine locked. Her fingers dug into the hard wooden edge of the lobby bench, splintering the varnish beneath her nails. A sudden, heavy rush of hot fluid soaked through the dried, gray-stained canvas of her uniform pants. It pooled on the polished oak slats beneath her. She looked down. Thick crimson streaks swirled through the clear amniotic fluid leaking onto her black non-slip work boots. Placental abruption. The impact of the fall had torn the lifeline. Nia pressed both hands flat against the rigid, cramping muscles of her belly. She did not scream. She clamped her teeth down on her bruised, swollen bottom lip. The metallic taste of fresh blood flooded her tongue. Her breathing shifted into sharp, shallow gasps. A woman stepped into her peripheral vision. She did not wear the standard pale blue Northwestern triage uniform. She wore immaculate, tailored white scrubs. A matte black stethoscope draped around her neck. A small, unbranded black pin rested on her lapel. A solid square of onyx identical to the card in Nia's pocket. The woman did not shout for a gurney. She did not ask for an insurance card. She knelt in the pool of blood and fluid. She placed a warm, steady hand directly over Nia's trembling knuckles on her stomach. "Breathe, Miss Kensington. Not Mrs. Thorne, not ma'am, Kensington. My team has secured the surgical wing." The nurse kept her voice low, authoritative, and void of panic. "You are safe. We are moving right now." A brushed steel surgical wheelchair slid up behind the bench. 2 men in dark scrubs lifted Nia by her elbows. They moved with silent, military precision. The wheels spun over the lobby linoleum, bypassing the crowded public triage desk. They pushed her through a set of swinging double doors. The chaotic noise of the emergency room faded. The air back here smelled of iodine, crisp, sterilized linen, and pure, filtered oxygen. The fluorescent lights overhead blurred into a continuous white streak as the wheelchair accelerated down the private corridor. Another set of doors parted. A loud, chaotic clatter of heavy gold bracelets shattered the clinical quiet. Victoria Sterling stood at the nurse's station of the maternity ward. Her crimson silk dress slashed like an open wound against the pastel yellow walls of the postpartum corridor. The slit exposed her thigh as she leaned over the high counter. She held a venti iced coffee in one hand. Her red stiletto tapped a frantic, irritated rhythm against the baseboard. "We are not authorizing a private room." Victoria slammed her manicured hand on the countertop. "Put her in a ward, a shared ward. The university is not footing the bill for a dismissed employee." Marcus stood 2 feet behind her. His dark, navy Tom Ford suit looked out of place among the medical equipment. He checked his gold Rolex. He stared at the double doors. The wheelchair rolled past them. Marcus locked eyes with Nia. He saw the blood soaking her cream canvas pants. He saw her knuckles drained of color, gripping the steel armrests. The vein along his temple pulsed. "Marcus!" Victoria snapped her fingers at him. The gold Cartier love bracelets banged together. "The lawyer is waiting for the signed addendum. Tell the charge nurse we are leaving." Marcus did not move. He watched the blood drip from Mia's boot onto the polished floor tiles, a red trail marking her path toward the surgical wing. Nia did not look away. She kept her chin lifted. She held his gaze until the heavy metal doors of operating room 4 swung shut, cutting his face from her view. The white scrubs team transferred her to the operating table. The pain spiked, a blinding white-hot iron driving through her pelvis. Her hands flew to her belly again. The rolling pressure of the baby had stopped. Leo was still, too still. "Fetal heart rate is dropping," the white-clad nurse announced. She strapped a silicone mask over Nia's nose and mouth. "We do not have time for a spinal block. Local anesthetic only. You are going to feel this. Ms. Kensington, I need you to anchor yourself." Nia gripped the cold steel bed rails. The surgeon stood at the foot of the bed. The stainless steel instruments clinked against the metal tray. The harsh circular surgical lamps burned down from the ceiling, eliminating every shadow in the room. "Cut now." The scalpel parted the skin. Fire laced through her lower abdomen. Nia threw her head back against the thin foam pillow. Her jaw locked, her eyes squeezed shut. The pain ripped her consciousness down to the absolute center of her body. She did not make a sound. She let the agony wash over her, a drowning ocean of raw nerve endings and tearing muscle. She focused every ounce of her will on the empty space inside her chest, offering it as a shield for the child being pulled from the wreckage. The metallic clatter of clamps echoed. Suction hoses hissed. Heavy, gloved hands reached deep into her pelvis. A sudden, violent tug shifted her entire body down the mattress. The immense, suffocating weight vanished from her belly. A terrifying silence filled the operating room. 5 seconds passed, then 10. The hum of the cardiac monitor stretched into an eternity. Nia opened her eyes. She stared at the blinding lights above. She waited for the sound that would tether her to the earth. A sharp, ragged wail shattered the room. The cry bounced off the tiled walls. It was furious. It was dense with life. Nia let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension dissolved from her spine. Her fingers uncurled from the steel bed rails. The nurse carried the newborn to her chest. Leo felt dense, a solid, compact mass of heat and muscle pressing against her collarbone. His skin burned with a frantic, pulsing warmth. He smelled of raw copper, warm milk, and the primal, metallic scent of fresh blood. A thick layer of white vernix coated his dark, slate-blue skin, which rapidly flushed into a deep, furious pink under the harsh LED bulbs. His tiny fists beat against her collarbone. Nia wrapped her arms around his wet body. She pulled him tight against her throat. She buried her face in his damp hair, her bruised lip pressed against his fragile skull. Hours passed. The surgical lights faded into the dim amber glow of a private recovery suite. The rain battered against the reinforced glass of the fourth-floor window. The rhythmic thud of the heart monitor provided a steady, reassuring baseline to the quiet room. Nia sat propped against 3 crisp pillows. The cream canvas uniform was gone, replaced by a soft white cotton hospital gown. A thick bandage stretched across her stitched abdomen. Marcus stands outside the reinforced glass of recovery room 4B. He stares through the rectangular window at the woman cradling a swaddled infant on the narrow mattress. He rests his palm flat against the cold pane. Victoria shouts his name from the elevator bank, and he drops his hand and walks away. Nia watched his shadow disappear from the hallway floor. She looked down at the boy in her arms. Leo slept. His small chest rose and fell in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. His dark eyelashes rested against his swollen cheeks. He was safe. He carried the bloodline of an empire in his tiny, beating heart. The room smelled of lavender soap and the lingering trace of rubbing alcohol. Nia traced the delicate curve of her son's ear. His cruel words washed over her. They held no sting. They held no power. They were the dying gasps of a man standing on a trapdoor he had built himself. She held her baby. She pulled the white hospital blanket tighter around his shoulders. She rested her chin against the top of his head. The storm raged against the glass outside, lightning fracturing the dark Chicago skyline into jagged, fleeting pieces. Her phone sat on the rolling bedside table. The screen remained dark. The message had been received. The wheels were already turning. The foundation was already shifting beneath the Belmont Heights campus. Marcus Thorne believed he had won. He believed he had severed his ties to a nameless liability. He believed the marble beneath his feet would support him forever. Nia stared at the closed wooden door of the recovery room. Her silence was absolute. She waited for the dawn. The rain lashed the reinforced glass of recovery room 4B. Heavy, driving sheets of water distorted the glowing red taillights of the Chicago traffic 50 feet below. Lightning fractured the dark skyline. The bright, jagged flashes illuminated the sterile white walls of the private suite for half a second before plunging the space back into a soft, amber gloom. The central air conditioning hummed through the overhead steel vents. The chilled air smelled of iodine, bleached bed linens, and the lingering, sharp sting of surgical antiseptic. Nia sat propped against 3 crisp, stiff hospital pillows. She wore a standard-issue white cotton hospital gown. The rough fabric scratched against her collarbones. The local anesthetic from the emergency cesarean section was fading fast. A sharp, searing wire of fire burned across her lower pelvis where 30 metal staples held her torn flesh together. She welcomed the agonizing bite of the incision. It anchored her to the present moment. It proved she had survived the freezing marble floor of the executive corridor. It proved the baby had survived the violent impact of the fall. Leo slept on her chest. He weighed 7 pounds and 3 ounces, a dense, compact mass of furious, radiating heat pressing against her sternum. His tiny, slate-blue hands gripped the white cotton of her gown. His knuckles were no larger than dried peas. Remnants of thick, white vernix clung to the deep creases of his neck and the soft curve of his shoulders. He smelled of warm iron, sterile iodine, and the sharp, primal copper tang of fresh blood. She slid her right hand over his fragile back. She spread her fingers wide. She pressed her palm flat against the microscopic ridges of his developing spine. She kept him anchored to the slow, steady drumbeat of her heart. Every shallow breath he took pushed against her hand, a rhythmic, defiant protest against the man who had tried to discard him in a puddle of soapy water. She reached toward the silver rolling table beside the bed. Her fingers brushed the cold, cracked glass of her smartphone. The screen had shattered when her body slammed into the amphitheater floor. A dense spiderweb of fractured glass obscured the digital keypad. Sharp shards flaked off the edges. She picked up the heavy device. The broken glass bit into the soft pad of her thumb. A single drop of dark red blood welled on her skin. She ignored the sting. She stared at the blank screen. For 4 years, she had buried a specific 10-digit number in the deepest, forgotten architecture of her contact list. She closed her eyes. The heavy, suffocating scent of the Oakbrook estate invaded the sterile hospital room. The smell of ancient mahogany woodwork, imported lemon oil, and century-old leather-bound books. 4 years ago, she had stood in the grand foyer of her family's primary residence. The vaulted ceiling featured hand-painted Renaissance frescoes imported piece by piece from Florence. The floor consisted of rare, unpolished black marble mined from a private quarry in Spain. Her father had waited at the base of the sweeping, suspended staircase. He wore a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit. He rested both hands on the silver head of his walking cane. He did not raise his voice. He did not block the massive iron front doors. She had placed her black American Express card on the antique silver receiving tray. She had set the heavy keys to her armored Maybach beside the plastic. She had looked her father in the eye and told him she was marrying Marcus Thorne, an ambitious academic from the south side of Chicago, a man who needed a partner, not a benefactor. She wanted a marriage forged in the fire of shared struggle. She wanted to be loved for her sweat and her character, not her multi-billion-dollar surname. She chose the romance of poverty over the reality of dynastic power. Her father had nodded. He warned her about men who build castles on borrowed dirt. He told her that wolves do not learn to love the sheep just because the sheep wears a wool coat. She had walked out the heavy oak doors. She carried a single canvas duffel bag into the sweltering Chicago July heat. She starved herself of her own power to feed the fragile ego of a man who ended up despising the very canvas uniform she wore to protect his pride. She had been a fool. She had built Marcus a kingdom from the shadows, and he had used the throne to crush her. The storm battered the hospital window. Thunder rattled the thick glass pane in its aluminum frame. Nia opened her eyes. The dark room rushed back in. The rhythmic hum of the intravenous fluid pump buzzed in her left ear. Marcus's voice bled through the mechanical noise. The memory was sharp and suffocating. He stood in the VIP green room. He held a crystal flute of vintage champagne. He looked at his own reflection in the antique mirror behind the mahogany wet bar. Victoria stood beside him, her loud gold bracelets clattering against the marble. His arrogance did not cut her. It illuminated the battlefield. She unlocked the phone. She navigated the shattered glass with her thumb. She tapped the 10 digits. The screen cast a harsh blue light across the swollen purple bruise stretching from her cheekbone to her jawline. She pressed the green icon. She lifted the broken device to her ear. The line did not ring. The secure satellite connection bypassed all standard cellular networks. It routed straight to a private telecommunications vault in a subterranean level of the Kensington Foundation building. A click. A heavy, atmospheric silence filled the speaker. The static carried the dense, pressurized weight of a room lined with soundproofed Kevlar. In the deep background, the faint, mechanical whine of a massive private jet engine idled on a wet tarmac. "Dad." The silence stretched. A slow, heavy exhale of breath passed over the microphone. The sound carried the terrifying gravity of a king waking from a 4-year slumber. "It's me. I hear you." "I was wrong. You were hopeful. There is a distinction." He left us on the floor. He took everything. He took a handful of dirt. He forgot who owns the earth. "I need you. I never stopped watching over you. The cars are 3 miles from your window." The connection terminated. The screen went dark. Nia lowered her hand. She dropped the phone onto the rolling bedside table. The plastic casing clattered against the stainless steel tray. She looked down at the boy resting against her chest. "Why?" Leo shifted his heavy head. His eyelids fluttered. His eyes opened. Small, dark, calculating eyes reflecting the dim amber light of the fetal monitor in the corner of the room. He did not cry. He stared at the white acoustic ceiling tiles with a quiet, terrifying focus. He possessed the exact same unyielding stare as the man currently driving toward the hospital. Nia's lips parted. The dried blood flaked from the raw skin of her bottom lip. The swollen tissue protested the movement. She almost smiled. The expression was small, a microscopic shift in the muscles of her bruised face, the first crack of light in the heavy concrete of her suffering. A quiet, dangerous recognition of the immense power rushing back into her veins. She lifted her chin. The hesitation vanished from her blood. Footsteps echoed in the long, empty corridor of the postpartum wing. Not the soft, hurried squeak of nurses wearing rubber-soled clogs, hard leather, thick soles striking the hospital linoleum in flawless, synchronized rhythm, plural. The heavy, coordinated tread of a private security detail moving in a diamond formation. The footfalls grew louder. They bypassed the central nursing station. They ignored the restricted access signs. They marched past the frantic protests of the hospital administrative staff. They stopped outside the door of Recovery Suite 4B. A massive shadow fell across the frosted glass window panel. The heavy brass lock mechanism clicked. The door handle turned. The heavy wooden door of Recovery Suite 4B swung inward. It did not creak. The brass hinges glided in silent, oiled perfection. 10 men stepped into the dim amber light. They wore identical tailored charcoal wool suits. Coiled acoustic wires vanished behind their right ears. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision. They formed a tactical perimeter around the hospital bed, their broad shoulders blocking the pastel yellow walls. Through the rain-streaked, reinforced window, lightning flashed. The sudden white glare illuminated the flooded Chicago street below. 4 black-armored Maybachs idled in the emergency loading zone. Heavy rainwater battered their bulletproof glass. Their hazard lights flashed a rhythmic, synchronized warning. A man walked through the human corridor. Elias Kensington, chairman of the Kensington Foundation. He wore a midnight blue Tom Ford 3-piece suit. A platinum Patek Philippe chronometer rested against his left wrist. His silver hair lay cropped tight to his scalp. His dark eyes locked onto the narrow hospital bed. He carried a brushed, titanium briefcase in his right hand. He stopped at the edge of the mattress. He looked at the torn, stitched skin beneath the rough white cotton gown. He looked at the massive purple bruise stretching across Nia's jawline. He mapped the dried blood flaking off her swollen bottom lip. He did not gasp. He did not cry. He looked at the small, dark bundle resting against her collarbone. Leo shifted. His tiny slate blue hands gripped the hospital blanket. The soft white cotton bunched between his microscopic knuckles. His chest rose and fell in a slow, rhythmic defiance. He weighed 7 pounds and 3 ounces. He smelled of warm iron, fresh milk, and sterile iodine. The billionaire placed his large hand over the crown of the newborn's head. The heat of the infant's skin transferred to his calloused palm. Nia looked up. Her father met her gaze. No words passed between them. They shared the same blood. They shared the same quiet, calculated capacity for destruction. They communicated through the pressure of his hand on the baby's skull, the promise of ruin. Elias Kensington withdrew his hand. He turned his back to the bed. He set the brushed titanium briefcase flat on the rolling stainless steel tray. His thumbs pressed the dual biometric locks. The heavy latches snapped open. A sharp, metallic crack echoed over the steady hum of the fetal heart monitor. He flipped the lid back. A thick stack of watermarked ivory parchment rested inside. The master deed to the land beneath Belmont Heights University. The original property charter signed 80 years ago by his grandfather. He gave a single rigid nod. The 10 men in charcoal suits moved. The hospital room transformed into a subterranean command center. 2 contractors pulled sleek black encrypted laptops from their breast pockets. They set them on the wide marble windowsill. Keys clacked in rapid, aggressive succession. A tall man with a jagged scar over his left eyebrow pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece. The wire transmitted a secure satellite frequency directly to the banking executives in Zurich. Execute the asset freeze. The man spoke in a low, flat baritone. All of them, Cayman shell companies included, route the trace through the Swiss central server. They were pulling the foundation out from under Marcus Thorne. Nia kept her hand flat against her baby's back. The room smelled of ozone, hot electronics, and the incoming tide of immense power. University endowment accounts locked, a second contractor announced. He did not look up from his glowing screen. The master ledger is seized. The board of directors is receiving the emergency audit notification now. The forged invoices are isolated. The high-definition security footage from the amphitheater green room is synced to the federal complaint. Elias stood by the window. He watched the rain fall on his city. He waited for the trap to snap shut. Footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. Loud, arrogant, heavy leather striking the linoleum floor. The sound carried the unmistakable cadence of a man who believed he owned the building. Marcus Thorne shoved the heavy wooden door open. He did not knock. He did not ask for permission. He stepped into the room like a conqueror claiming his spoils. He wore his dark navy Tom Ford suit. The platinum tie clip caught the fluorescent light from the corridor. He held a beige legal folder in his right hand. Victoria Sterling trailed behind him. Her crimson silk dress slashed through the doorway. Her heavy gold Cartier love bracelets clashed together as she pushed her hair back, a chaotic, metallic clatter. She carried a venti iced coffee. She looked bored. Marcus stopped. He looked at the 10 men in tailored charcoal suits. He looked at the glowing laptop screens resting on the windowsill. He looked at the brushed titanium briefcase open on the surgical tray. He laughed. The sound bounced off the pastel yellow walls, a loud, booming burst of arrogant amusement. "What is this?" Marcus sneered. He tossed the beige legal folder onto the foot of Nia's bed. It landed with a soft slap against her covered shins. "Did you call hospital security? Did you manage to find some pro bono legal aid clinic to draft a restraining order at 2 in the morning?" Nia did not move. She pulled the white blanket tighter around Leo. The baby kicked against her ribs, a small, hidden flutter of life. "I told you the parameters." Marcus walked closer to the bed. He ignored the men in the suits. He believed his title made him invincible. "I am the president of Belmont Heights. I control the board. I control the local judges. You have a handful of hourly rent, a cops crowding a recovery room. You are embarrassing yourself." Victoria crossed her arms. Her red stiletto tapped against the floor tiles. "Just sign the custody surrender, Nia." Victoria rolled her eyes. The gold hoop swung from her ears. "We have a victory gala to return to. The governor is waiting for a toast. I am pregnant. I need my rest. I do not have time to stand in a public ward smelling of iodine and failure." Marcus pointed a thick finger at the beige folder. "You sign that paper." Marcus raised his voice. The audio waveform of his arrogance filled the small room. "You take the $10,000 severance. You walk away. If you fight me, I call the federal prosecutor. I hand them the embezzlement files bearing your forged signature. Your little bodyguards cannot protect you from a federal indictment." He leaned over the foot of the bed. "I have the emergency injunction," Marcus gloated. He reveled in the sound of his own threats. "Judge Heiress signed it himself. He owed me a favor for his daughter's medical school admission. The boy belongs to me. I will take him from this room tonight. I will raise him in the Gold Coast townhouse. I will hire a French nanny. He will never know your name. He will never know his mother scrubbed toilets for a living." Nia stared at him. She rested her left hand over the baby's warm head. Her silence was a wall. "Say something." Marcus slapped his palm against the metal bedrail. The sharp crack echoed in the room. "You sit there with that blank, pathetic stare. It sickens me. I built an empire with my bare hands. I brought in $300 million in endowments. I dine with the elite. You belong in the dirt. I am erasing you from history." The tall contractor with the scarred eyebrow did not flinch at the loud noise. He kept his eyes on his laptop screen. He typed a 12-digit override code into the banking portal. "Who are these people?" Marcus snapped. He turned his attention to the contractor. "I demand you leave this room immediately. I am Dr. Marcus Thorne. I am taking custody of my son. If you do not clear out, I will have the hospital administrator fire every single one of you." The contractor pressed the enter key. Elias Kensington turned away from the window. He stepped out of the shadows. The harsh fluorescent light from the hallway caught the silver at his temples. He adjusted his silk cuffs. He buttoned the center button of his midnight blue jacket. Marcus froze. The arrogant smile slid from his face. His jaw went slack. The thick vein along his temple stopped pulsing. His eyes darted to the platinum Patek Philippe. They darted to the sharp, bespoke cut of the Tom Ford suit. He recognized the man. Every university president in the country recognized the man. He had spent 3 years courting this specific billionaire. He had memorized the man's biography. He had studied the man's investment portfolios. He had begged the man's foundation for grant money. "Mr. Kensington." Marcus dropped his voice. The booming authority vanished, replaced by a thin, reedy squeak. He straightened his posture. He forced a desperate, professional smile. I had no idea the foundation chairman was touring the hospital tonight. If my office had been notified, we would have prepared a proper reception." Elias did not speak. He stepped forward. His leather Oxfords made no sound on the linoleum. He possessed the quiet, terrifying gravity of an apex predator. Marcus looked from Elias to the men in charcoal suits. He looked at the titanium briefcase. He looked at the bed. He looked at Nia. The gears in his mind grinded together. The math refused to align. A billionaire philanthropist standing guard over a fired janitor. Elite private security contractors running encrypted satellite uplinks in a maternity ward. "What?" Marcus stammered. His voice cracked. He reached up and tugged at his platinum tie clip. "Why are you in this room, sir?" Elias stopped 2 feet from Marcus. "Hey!" The air in the room grew heavy. The oxygen thinned. "You forged her signature," Elias spoke softly. The quiet volume was far more terrifying than a shout. "You filed a false emergency injunction. You left her bleeding on a marble floor my father paid for." Marcus stepped backward. His Italian loafer caught on the edge of the linoleum tile. He stumbled. "Her?" Marcus pointed a shaking finger at the hospital bed. "She is a janitor. She cleans the dormitories. She scrubs the basement floors. She has nothing to do with the Kensington Foundation." Nia shifted against the stiff pillows. Leo let out a quiet, rhythmic breath against her chest. The newborn shifted his weight. He opened his dark eyes. He shared the Kensington nose. He shared the Kensington stare. Elias reached into the titanium briefcase. He pulled out the heavy ivory parchment, the master deed. He held it up to the light. The gold foil seal of the city of Chicago gleamed. "You thought you were discarding a peasant, Marcus, but you just evicted yourself from the empire I let you borrow." Marcus stopped breathing. His eyes widened. The whites showed all the way around his dark irises. Elias lowered the parchment. He looked directly into the eyes of the man who had tormented his child. "My daughter never needed your money." Elias delivered the final blow. "She was testing your character. You failed." The silence that followed swallowed all the oxygen in the room. The memory surfaced without warning. "My daughter." The 2 words hit Marcus like a physical strike to the sternum. The breath rushed out of his lungs in a ragged gasp. He looked at the wadded cream canvas uniform sitting in the clear plastic belongings bag near the door. He looked at the woman he had berated for 4 years. He looked at the bruised, swollen face of the woman whose credit cards he had just canceled. He looked at the baby. "Leo!" The truth echoed in his skull. The pieces slammed into place. The anonymous donor who had paid his early career debts, the sudden, miraculous approval of his grant proposals. The board of directors always voting in his favor. He had never built a mountain of gold. He had been standing on her shoulders the entire time. Victoria stopped tapping her red stiletto. The heavy gold bracelets went still. Her jaw dropped, her face drained of all color, leaving her heavy makeup looking like a grotesque mask. The crimson silk dress suddenly felt like a target rather than a crown. She backed away from Marcus. She bumped into the wooden doorframe. Her iced coffee slipped from her manicured fingers. The plastic cup hit the floor. The lid popped off. Brown liquid and crushed ice splattered across the linoleum, soaking the toes of her expensive heels. She did not look down. She stared at the billionaire. The tall contractor with the scarred eyebrow pulled his earpiece out. "Chairman." The contractor closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "The Cayman accounts are seized. The routing numbers have been reversed. The forged invoices are currently in the hands of the FBI field office. The university board has voted to terminate Marcus Thorne under the gross misconduct clause, effective 5 minutes ago." Marcus swayed. His knees buckled an inch before he locked them. His hands shook. The vintage Dom Perignon soured in his stomach. The mountain of gold he had boasted about was dissolving into ash around him. "No," Marcus whispered. He shook his head. "No, this is a mistake. I am the president. I built the medical campus merger." "You built nothing." Elias handed the master deed to the contractor. "My daughter approved the merger funding while folding your laundry." Marcus turned to the bed. He looked at Nia. He searched her bruised face for a trace of the submissive, quiet woman he had married. He searched for the tears she had shed in the executive bathroom. He found nothing. She did not gloat. She did not yell. She did not throw his cruel words back in his face. She pressed her hand flat against her baby's back. She held the child born to rule the empire Marcus had just lost. Her silence destroyed him. It was a fortress he could not breach. It was a weapon he could not disarm. He had spent 4 years mocking her hourly wage, never realizing she owned the ground beneath his feet. His phone buzzed in his breast pocket. Then Victoria's phone rang in her velvet clutch. Then the hospital room telephone mounted on the wall began to flash a bright red light. The destruction was cascading. The bank alerts, the board notifications, the legal summons. The room spun. The fluorescent lights buzzed a loud, angry hum. The air conditioning chilled the sweat on his forehead. He was ruined. He was trapped. The ground collapsed beneath him. Time shifted forward. The victory gala reached its climax. The grand amphitheater at Belmont Heights University smelled of wilting white orchids and the sharp chemical tang of industrial pine floor wax. 5-foot swan ice sculptures flanked the perimeter of the mahogany stage. The intricate carved wings had begun to lose their shape. Freezing water wept down the frozen feathers, dripping in slow, steady intervals onto the Italian marble floor. The same stone floor Nia had scrubbed on her hands and knees 24 hours earlier. 5,000 wealthy patrons sat in rows of plush velvet chairs. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note against the vaulted acoustic ceiling. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, fractured glow over the bespoke tuxedos and hand-beaded evening gowns of the Chicago elite. Flashbulbs popped in rapid, blinding succession. Event photographers crowded the center aisle, their heavy lenses aimed at the center of the stage. Waitstaff in crisp white linen vests navigated the perimeter, balancing silver trays of vintage champagne. Marcus Thorne stood behind the central mahogany podium. His dark navy Tom Ford suit absorbed the harsh, intersecting beams of the theatrical spotlights. A heavy gold academic medallion rested flat against his platinum tie clip. He smiled at the board of directors seated in the VIP boxes. He gripped the edges of the podium. He prepared his lungs to accept a 10-year contract extension. Victoria Sterling sat in the exact center of the front row. Her crimson silk dress blazed against the dark wood wainscoting lining the orchestra pit. Heavy gold Cartier love bracelets armored her wrists. She crossed her long legs, letting the silk fabric fall away from her thigh. Her red stiletto heel clicked against the brass frame of her velvet chair, a rhythmic, triumphant metronome. High above the crowd, Julian Hayes sat motionless in the darkened audiovisual scaffolding. He wore the same faded black Belmont Heights production crew t-shirt. He rested his calloused hands on the glowing digital mixing console. He did not watch the man delivering hollow platitudes at the podium. He watched his left monitor. He slid the master audio fader down a fraction of an inch. He placed his finger over the red playback key on his solid-state drive. At the back of the auditorium, the heavy oak double doors slammed open. The brass latches cracked like a rifle shot. The noise severed the polite murmurs of the elite crowd. The event photographers lowered their cameras. The waitstaff stopped moving. 10 elite private security contractors marched down the center aisle. They wore tailored charcoal wool suits. Coiled acoustic wires vanished behind their right ears. They moved in a synchronized, tactical diamond formation. Their heavy leather boots struck the carpet in a unified, terrifying rhythm. They ignored the frantic protests of the university ushers. Elias Kensington walked in the center of the diamond. The billionaire possessed the quiet, suffocating gravity of an apex predator. He wore a midnight blue three-piece suit. A platinum Patek Philippe chronometer gleamed on his left wrist. He carried a brushed titanium briefcase in his right hand. Nia Kensington walked beside him. Wait! She did not wear a stained canvas uniform. She did not smell of bleach and cheap sweat. She wore a sweeping, bespoke cream cashmere coat layered over tailored white silk trousers. The luxury fabric flowed around her, catching the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers. The purple bruise on her cheekbone stood in stark, violent contrast to the pristine elegance of her clothing. She held her newborn son tight against her chest. Leo weighed 7 pounds and 3 ounces. A thick ivory cotton blanket wrapped his small, dense body. His tiny, slate blue hands gripped the edge of her cashmere lapel. He smelled of warm iron, fresh milk, and sterile iodine. Nia kept her left hand pressed flat against his fragile spine, anchoring him to the steady drumbeat of her own heart. The contractors parted. They cleared a physical path to the front row. The lead guard placed a heavy hand on the shoulder of the university provost, forcing the man out of his seat. Nia sat down in the red velvet chair. She adjusted the thick blanket around her baby. She kept her chin lifted. She looked up at the stage. Elias left her side. He climbed the carpeted stairs. He bypassed Marcus. He stopped 2 feet away, commanding the center of the platform. Julian pressed the red playback key. The massive 40-foot LED screen behind the stage snapped black. A high-definition video feed illuminated the amphitheater. The footage carried no time code, just raw, flawless clarity. The executive corridor, the heavy mahogany doors, the yellow plastic mop bucket, the puddle of soapy gray water. Marcus's voice boomed through the line array speakers, unfiltered and aggressive. You embody the dirt we scrape off our shoes before walking into the amphitheater. 5,000 guests watched Victoria lift her red stiletto. They watched the heavy plastic bucket tip. They watched 2 gallons of dirty water flood the marble. They watched Marcus place his Italian leather loafer on the wooden mop handle, pinning it down. They watched Nia fall hard onto the stone. Her pregnant belly cracked against the freezing wet marble. They watched her curl into a protective ball while the president of the university adjusted his silver cufflinks. Gasps ripped through the auditorium. Crystal champagne flutes shattered against the floor tiles. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed from the lobby. Pearls clattered against collarbones. The board of directors stood up in their VIP boxes. Marcus staggered backward. His Italian loafer caught the edge of the podium base. He reached for his silver microphone. He needed to speak. He needed to control the narrative. The microphone was dead. Julian had severed his localized feed. A woman stood up from the third row. Clara, the night shift facilities manager, clutched a beige legal folder to her chest. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. Her hands shook so hard the stiff paper rattled against her ribs. Julian unmuted a wireless handheld frequency. He told me to serve her divorce papers while she bled on a hospital bed. Clara's voice echoed through the massive room, trembling with shame and grief. He offered me a 6-figure salary and a corner office to abandon my friend. I forged the signature on her locker clearance. The crowd watched in stunned silence. But Clara dropped the beige folder onto the carpet. She covered her face with her hands. Another woman stepped into the center aisle. She wore tailored white surgical scrubs. A small, unbranded black onyx pin rested on her lapel. She stood with military posture. She arrived at Northwestern Memorial in a severe hemorrhage protocol. The triage nurse projected her voice with surgical precision. Placental abruption caused by blunt force trauma to the abdomen. He left his child to suffocate on a dirty floor. A heavy quiet fell over the auditorium. Elias Kensington did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Marcus. He reached into his breast pocket. He produced a single sheet of watermarked ivory parchment, the official legal transcription of the hot mic recording. He laid the thick paper flat on the wood. He leaned into the live microphone. His voice rolled through the acoustic space like distant thunder. She is a nameless peasant who got to scrub the floors of my castle, and tomorrow I am erasing her from history. Silence crashed over the amphitheater. 1 second passed. The room smelled of melting swan ice sculptures and the sharp metallic tang of raw ozone burning off the heavy theatrical spotlights. Then, too, Elias dragged his calloused thumb across the sharp edge of the watermarked ivory parchment, leaving a microscopic, deliberate crease in the thick paper. Then 3. Marcus's chest stopped moving, his breath trapped behind a locked, trembling jaw, while the gold Rolex on his wrist ticked away the final moments of his reign. Nia looked up from the warm weight of her sleeping son, her dark eyes locked onto the man sweating in the Tom Ford suit. "Tell me, who has nothing now?" Marcus opened his mouth. No sound emerged. Elias tapped the podium twice. Up in the scaffolding, Julian hit the spacebar on his laptop. The massive LED screen flashed. A new date stamp appeared in the bottom right corner. A sterile, dimly lit waiting room at a Michigan Avenue women's clinic. Victoria Sterling paced the faded linoleum floor. Her crimson silk dress looked absurd against the cheap plastic chairs. She handed a thick white envelope of cash to a terrified teenager in gray sweatpants. The teenager handed Victoria a sealed medical envelope bearing the clinic's bright blue logo. A man in a bespoke tuxedo stood up from the VIP donor section. Dr. Vance, Chief of Obstetrics. The damning truth echoed through the room. Victoria was never an admitted patient at our facility. The doctor spoke directly into a microphone handed to him by a security contractor. She purchased positive pregnancy blood results from an 18-year-old girl in our lobby to fabricate a pregnancy. Marcus turned his head, his eyes locking onto the crimson dress blazing in the front row. The muscles in his dark face slackened as the mountain of his own deceit collapsed onto his chest. Victoria did not stand. She did not reach for her heavy gold jewelry. She stared straight ahead at the hardwood stage, her silence cementing her guilt into the floorboards. An older man with silver hair stood 2 seats to her left. Arthur Sterling, board treasurer. He buttoned the center button of his suit jacket. The final judgment hung in the air. The Sterling family no longer recognizes this woman. He walked up the carpeted aisle. He did not look back. Marcus gripped the edges of the mahogany podium. His knuckles turned light gray. The platinum tie clip dug into his chest as he leaned forward. He raised his hands. He opened his mouth to command the room. The press photographers lowered their heavy lenses. The journalists clicked their pens shut and slid their notepads into their jacket pockets. The board of directors turned their backs toward the stage, murmuring in low, bored voices to their spouses. The waitstaff abandoned their silver trays on empty chairs. The security guards stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles. The 5,000 wealthy patrons began checking their phones, adjusting their silk ties, and gathering their evening coats. Marcus Thorne shouted into a dead microphone. No one turned to look at him. He was a ghost. Nia pulled the cream cashmere tighter around her sleeping son. The newborn breathed a steady, warm rhythm against her collarbone. She rested her hand on the back of his fragile head. She rose from the velvet chair. The end game began. The auditorium descended into absolute chaos. Nia Kensington rose from the red velvet chair, the bespoke cream cashmere coat draped over her shoulders, absorbing the fractured, chaotic light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. She held her newborn son tight against her chest. Leo weighed 7 pounds and 3 ounces. He formed a dense, compact mass of furious, radiating heat against her collarbone. His tiny slate blue hands gripped the edge of her cashmere lapel. His small knuckles were no larger than dried peas. He smelled of warm iron, fresh milk, and sterile iodine. The grand mahogany double doors bottlenecked. 5,000 guests pushed against each other in the center aisles. Governors shoved past university deans. State senators abandoned their spouses to secure a faster exit. The polite decorum of the Chicago elite vanished the moment the power dynamic inverted. Bespoke tuxedo jackets snagged on the brass armrests of the folding chairs. Hand-beaded evening gowns tore against the sharp wooden edges of the VIP boxes. The crowd trampled discarded silk event programs, shattered crystal champagne flutes, and crushed white orchids under their patent leather shoes. The massive room smelled of panicked sweat, spilled vintage champagne, and melting ice. They wanted no association with the man bleeding his legacy onto the stage. Victoria Sterling sat alone in the exact center of the front row. Her crimson silk dress blazed against the emptying seats like an open wound. The heavy gold Cartier love bracelets weighed down her trembling wrists. She stared at the 50-foot LED screen suspended above the mahogany platform. The frozen, high-definition image of her handing a thick white envelope of cash to a terrified teenager burned into her retinas. A swarm of event photographers abandoned the stage. They rushed the front row. Heavy camera lenses formed a suffocating barricade around the crimson dress. Flashbulbs erupted. Jagged, blinding bursts of white light captured her exposed fraud from every angle. The reporters shouted rapid, overlapping questions. Their voices merged into a deafening, predatory roar. They asked about the offshore accounts. They asked about the forged medical records. They asked how much she paid for the fake pregnancy. Victoria pressed both hands against her flat stomach. The manicured fingers shook against the smooth silk. She possessed no child. She possessed no Cayman trust. She possessed no equity in a Gold Coast penthouse. She stood up. She attempted to push past a Pulitzer-winning cameraman blocking the aisle. Her red stiletto heel caught the heavy brass hinge of the velvet chair. The thin metal spike snapped. She stumbled forward. She fell hard onto the central aisle runner. Her palms slapped the rough industrial carpet. The heavy gold hoop swung forward, tangling in her salon-styled hair. A diamond ring snagged on the fabric of the floor runner. No one offered a hand. Arthur Sterling stood near the grand lobby exit. He buttoned his charcoal suit jacket. He looked down the long, carpeted incline at his niece kneeling in the debris of her shattered social standing. He adjusted his silk tie. He turned his back to the stage. He walked out the double doors. 2 university security guards pushed through the wall of aggressive photographers. They wore dark gray uniforms and heavy-duty belts. They did not speak a word of comfort. They grabbed Victoria by her bare elbows. They hauled her upward with brutal, mechanical efficiency. The aggressive motion ripped the crimson silk along her thigh, exposing her bare skin to the flashing cameras. They marched her up the carpeted incline. Victoria dragged her broken red stiletto across the floorboards. She limped past the towering glass windows of the lobby. The local Chicago press corps waited outside in the freezing rain. They pressed their heavy camera rigs against the wet glass. They documented the expulsion of the former dean of admissions. Her loud gold jewelry clattered an erratic, panicked rhythm against the security guards' wrists. The chaotic metallic sound faded into the damp, unforgiving night air. High above the chaos, Julian Hayes sat in the darkened audiovisual scaffolding. He watched the red recording light on his solid-state drive blink a steady, rhythmic pulse. He slid the master audio fader down to 0. He reached forward and pressed the power button on the digital mixing console. The glowing monitors faded to black. He unclipped his silver carabiner from the safety harness. He did not smile. He packed his coiled professional audio cables into a canvas duffel bag. He hoisted the heavy strap over his shoulder. He walked down the metal utility stairs, leaving the wreckage of the academic empire to the federal authorities. Marcus Thorne stood trapped behind the central mahogany podium. His dark navy Tom Ford suit felt like a lead coffin. The platinum tie clip dug into his sternum, restricting the airflow to his burning lungs. He watched the board of directors empty the VIP boxes. Men he had spent 3 years courting on private golf courses refused to cast a single glance in his direction. The $300 million endowment remained frozen. The Kensington Foundation had severed the financial blood supply. The university was bankrupting him in real time. He gripped the edges of the mahogany podium. The polished wood splintered beneath his desperate fingernails. He looked at the melting swan ice sculptures flanking the stage corners. Freezing water wept down the carved, translucent feathers. The drops hit the Italian marble floor in a slow, heavy countdown. A puddle of cold water expanded across the stage, mirroring the soapy gray liquid he had left Nia lying in 24 hours earlier. He needed to control the room. He needed to project the illusion of power. "I built this university from the dirt." The words fell flat. a hollow, pathetic echo in a room engineered for titans. The line array speakers remained dead. The unamplified sound barely reached the front row of empty velvet seats. No one stopped walking. The mass exodus continued until the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the last departing guest. The amphitheater fell into a suffocating silence. The central air conditioning hummed a low, mechanical note against the acoustic ceiling tiles. The harsh, theatrical spotlights burned down on Marcus, illuminating the sweat beading along his hairline. The heavy scent of his Creed Aventus cologne turned sour, mixing with the sharp, acidic odor of his own terror. He stood alone on the platform. He was an emperor presiding over an empire of discarded programs, broken glass, and empty velvet chairs. He looked down at his Italian leather loafers. The toes were soaked in the freezing water pooling from the melting swan sculptures. Heavy, synthetic rubber soles struck the stage stairs. Not the tailored charcoal suits of the Kensington private security contractors. Dark navy nylon windbreakers, bright yellow letters spelling FBI spanned the broad back panels. 5 federal agents swarmed the mahogany platform. The heavy clatter of their tactical gear shattered the quiet of the auditorium. They bypassed the melting ice. They ignored the frozen image of Marcus's cruelty lingering on the massive LED screen. The lead agent reached the podium. He carried no beige legal folder. He offered no civil negotiation. He grabbed the shoulder of Marcus's bespoke jacket. The rough tactical glove snagged the expensive Italian wool, pulling the tailored seam taut. Marcus jerked his body away. The sudden shift in momentum sent his center of gravity backward. The yellow plastic mop bucket still sat near the stage stairs. Marcus's loafer caught the heavy plastic rim, sending him crashing to the floor. The harsh industrial fibers of the floorrunner burned through his thin suit trousers. He hit his knees with a loud, sickening thud. The impact sent a dull, throbbing ache straight up his femurs. He pressed his palms flat against the carpet. The synthetic material smelled of spilled vintage champagne, pine floor wax, and stale dust. He stayed on his knees. He looked up. Nia stood 3 feet away. The ambient stage light caught the soft, luxurious texture of her cream cashmere coat. The tailored white silk trousers fell in flawless, unbroken lines over her black leather boots. The purple bruise stretching across her jawline stood in stark, undeniable contrast to her pristine clothing. It served as the only remaining evidence of the working-class disguise she had worn for 4 years. She kept her left hand flat against Leo's back. The baby breathed a slow, steady rhythm against her chest. The newborn shifted his weight, pressing his small, dense body closer to the warmth of her neck. His dark eyes remained open. He stared at the man kneeling on the floor. He possessed the exact same unyielding, terrifying focus as his grandfather. He carried the bloodline of an $8 billion trust in his fragile, beating heart. Marcus stared at the thick white blanket. He looked at the son he had demanded to steal, the infant he had plotted to lock inside a Gold Coast nursery with a hired nanny, the child who now owned the master deed to the very ground bruising Marcus's kneecaps. The lead federal agent stepped off the stage. He grabbed Marcus's left wrist. The cold steel of a handcuff bit into the warm skin over Marcus's radial artery. The ratcheting metal teeth clicked, a sharp, undeniable finality echoing in the cavernous, empty room. "I am his father," the plea cracked in his dry throat, a pathetic, reedy whisper devoid of the booming, arrogant authority he had wielded in the executive corridor. Nia did not flinch. She traced the delicate, microscopic shell of her baby's ear with her right thumb. Her silence formed a heavy, impenetrable wall. It offered no forgiveness. It provided no anger for him to feed on. She denied him the validation of her rage. She starved him of the tears he had demanded. The agent twisted Marcus's arm behind his back. The shoulder joint popped. Hot, blinding pain laced down his bicep. The agent grabbed the right wrist. The second steel cuff snapped shut. The heavy chain pulled tight across his lower spine, locking his hands together. Marcus strained his neck. He looked up at the towering figure wrapped in bespoke cream cashmere. He looked at the dark eyes of his infant son. He looked at the face of the woman he had discarded into a puddle of dirty mop water. Nia! A single fractured breath, the final, desperate syllable of his dead kingdom. Nia shifted her weight. Her white silk trousers rustled against the brass frame of the velvet armrest. She looked down at the man kneeling in the wreckage of his own design. She saw the sweat pooling in the deep creases of his forehead. She saw the torn wool of his Tom Ford suit. She adjusted the blanket around her baby. "The floor is yours to clean." She turned away. She did not look back. The 10 elite security contractors formed a tactical diamond formation around her. Elias Kensington walked beside his daughter. The platinum Patek Philippe chronometer caught the glow of the distant lobby lights. The brushed titanium briefcase hung heavy from his right hand. They walked up the center aisle. Ah! The remaining journalists parted like a receding tide. They lowered their heavy camera lenses. They dropped their audio recorders to their sides. They bowed their heads. They recognized the silent, crushing gravity of undeniable power moving through the room. Marcus knelt on the rough carpet. He watched the cream cashmere coat disappear into the shadows of the grand exit. The panic clawed at his throat. He lunged forward. He tried to follow the dynasty slipping permanently through his fingers. The jagged steel edge of the handcuff sliced deep into his wrist bone. The arresting pain halted his body. Blood welled against the polished silver metal. The federal agent shoved a heavy tactical boot against Marcus's spine, pinning him to the floor. Nia walked past the towering glass windows into the Chicago dawn. She stepped into the empire she had always owned. The heavy oak doors clicked shut.